Good evening, everyone. I'm Courtney Graham with the Engagement Department at the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome to this evening's virtual member lecture on the Hartwell Memorial Window. When this project comes to fruition this spring, it will be the result not only of many talented colleagues across the museum, but also a deep civic spirit of philanthropy made possible through the generosity of many Art Institute supporters, led by the Antiquarian Society, the Chauncey and Marion Deering McCormick Family Foundation, and Anne and Samuel M. Mencoff. We're so glad to have you, our members, joining us virtually. And while we wish that we could welcome you in person, we hope that this digital format can offer a chance to stay connected to the Art Institute from home. We'll begin with a brief review of some of the features we'll be using today. This program will be shared in presentation mode, so we have turned off video and microphones for attendees. For optimal viewing, please select full screen mode under View Options in the top right corner of your screen. Throughout the presentation, you're invited to share questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We look forward to answering some of those at the end of the presentation. Closed captions are available and can be turned on via the controls at the bottom of the screen as well. If you encounter any technical difficulties during today's program, again, please let us know in the Q&A and we'll do our best to assist you. This program is being recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it in the future, you'll be welcome to do so. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, curators Sarah Kelly Oehler and Liz McGoey. Sarah is the Field-McCormick Chair and Curator of Arts of the Americas, and Liz is the Samuel M. Mencoff Associate Curator of the Arts of the Americas. We're so delighted to have both of them with us this evening for a sneak peek at this incredible achievement in stained glass, which will be a true highlight in the Henry Crown Gallery at the top of the Women's Board Grand Staircase. Thank you, Sarah and Liz. I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yes, thanks for the introduction, Courtney.
Yes, we're so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you all about this extraordinary achievement, which is the Hartwell Memorial Window. And it is a monumental leaded glass window produced by Tiffany Studios in 1917 and designed by Agnes Northrop. And to give you a sense of its monumentality, it is approximately 26 feet high by 18 feet wide. And it's comprised of 48 individual panels of glass that together unite into a composition of just radiant and exceptional beauty. And, you know, when I think about the tremendous output of Tiffany Studios over the course of its long years in business, and the quality that they're known for, this window becomes all the more compelling. Every inch of this vast expanse is compelling, it is dazzling, it is simply captivating.
We've been spending a lot of time in front of this, and you'll see sneak previews later on, but every time I'm around it, I'm just reminded by how the play of scale is really moving. Its magnitude still makes me catch my breath. You feel small next to this window, next to the majestic landscape, but it's in all of the small details that nature comes to life.
Yeah. So the Hartwell Memorial Window was installed in what was called the Central Baptist Church in 1917, and that's in Providence, Rhode Island, and it's now called the Community Church of Providence. And on the right, you can see a photograph as it was installed in the church, and you can see that it's some 25 feet over the altar, sort of grandly presiding over the sacred space. And this is a photograph that I took in June of 2017. I had been approached about a month earlier to see if there was any interest in the Art Institute acquiring it. And so I immediately, as soon as possible, flew to Providence and was utterly convinced. It really was this moment where we embarked upon what would become a very long journey to the present day. And I do want to state just at the outset that it was really rewarding to work with the church on this. I think that they felt that they wanted to be the best possible stewards for the window, even if that meant finding the window a new home in a museum. And it was a collective decision of the entire congregation, and it's one that has been very meaningful for both of us.
Yeah, I think they really knew what a gem they had here. This is a window that, despite having been cataloged in some of the Tiffany scholarship, was really not well known. And as you can see its position in the church, it really was a kind of singular work there. And for them, it, again, as Sarah said, it was wonderful that they had this long vision of stewardship and that we've been able to work with them in bringing the window to Chicago for its next chapter. Speaking about this commission, this window is truly one of the most complex stained glass landscapes produced in the United States. And it was a commission by the woman pictured here on the right, Mary Hartwell, as a memorial in honor of her husband, Frederick, pictured on the left. The church was moving into a new building planned for 1917, and Mary Hartwell was one of the first members to commit to a memorial in the new building, and as you saw, in the most prominent space over the altar. Both Hartwells were active in the church. Frederick had served as a deacon of the church, and the landscape, as you'll see it and explore it, was inspired by their family home in New Hampshire. Mary Hartwell had such a vision to see this beautiful land realized in glass. And it's a place that meant a great deal to the Hartwells then and now. I have to say to everyone how lucky we are to have a wonderful group of Hartwell descendants on this Zoom today. And for all of us, it was amazing to learn that this home is still nestled in the White Mountains that inspired this commission, and that it's truly an object that still continues to mean a lot for the family.
And, you know, in many ways, it makes perfect sense that Mary Hartwell would have turned to Tiffany Studios in 1917 when she wanted to commission this window. They were really the leading producers of glass windows, of memorial windows, of glass products more broadly, and so many other works that brought them fame and renown.
Louis Comfort Tiffany started the Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company in 1885, which would later go on to have the name of Tiffany Studios. And for nearly 50 years, Tiffany and his team were innovators and leaders in the field of glass production. The firm became synonymous with radiant materials and technical brilliance, and the vibrant and tactile forms and the colors and the effects that the studio achieved in glass, along with really dynamic designs, resulted in some of the most intricate, highly naturalistic, really breathtaking objects in existence. From stained glass windows, as you'll see through the Hartwell Memorial Window, to the vases you see here, but also other works in leaded glass. This is another star in our collection, certainly the hanging head dragonfly shade and turtleback mosaic base by Tiffany Studios, the shade of which was designed by Clara Driscoll, another female like Agnes Northrop, who was working with a lot of agency at this firm, creating amazing designs and realizing these spectacular objects. Women really were key players at Tiffany.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly extraordinary to think about how many women worked for Tiffany Studios throughout the years. And in many ways, what's fascinating, I think, to me, is the gendered roles that they took on in this work at the studios. So by and large, men, although not exclusively, men were designers. They were metalsmiths. They performed much of the hot work that needed to happen. And women were the glass selectors and the glass cutters. And so they were really driving many of the color schemes that Tiffany Studios was so famous for, and integral to the entire work that had to be done. Although it's fascinating, the other aspect of this that needs to be acknowledged is that women, in fact, to work at Tiffany Studios had to be unmarried. Clearly not a requirement of the men who worked at Tiffany Studios, but certainly a requirement of the women. And so that makes it all the more extraordinary to think about an example such as Agnes Northrop, who is the designer of our window, and such a key person at Tiffany Studios over the course of about a 5-decade career that she worked with Louis Comfort Tiffany. And this is again, like, we've had many joys throughout this entire process, but another joy, I think, for both Liz and myself is thinking about and researching and being able to showcase the life and work of this extraordinary woman designer who was really the leading landscape window designer for Tiffany Studios. She specialized in many of their most unique commissions. She worked very closely with Louis Comfort Tiffany. She started working with him, in fact, in 1884, so before it was even incorporated as a firm. And she ended up closing out Tiffany Studios after his death in the 1930s. So it was an incredible, nearly 5-decade career. She won awards, she had patents on some of her designs. And really, she also, for that matter, ran the women's department, but that was sort of short-lived. And then she backed off and became really the one-of-a-kind landscape window designer for Tiffany.
Yeah, she was working on these truly special commissions like the Hartwell Memorial Window. And we know that she specialized in intricate landscapes and also worked with a team. I mean, that's in bringing her story to light, what we also have had so many conversations about and truly want to be part of our presentation here is that while everyone knows the name Louis Comfort Tiffany, there were hundreds of employees at the firm who were bringing these amazing objects to life and circulating, really throughout the United States and the world. And there were a lot of hands that helped Northrop realize these designs. The firm had different divisions of specialists who developed glass formulas, made the different types of sheets and cast glass, selected specific pieces for each project and cut them and fit them together, all working towards the realization of Northrop's design. These images show her keen design sense. In the watercolor design for a different stained glass window that you see on the left, we can see how she conceived of intricate, really detailed natural scenes for architectural settings. She's envisioning it in these kind of spatial relationships that would have been dictated by the architectural spaces that they were going into. But on the right, a rare work in oil where you see her working up a complete idea through a painting shows her mastery of naturalistic detail, of atmosphere, of the way she plays with perspective. Truly kind of the way she's formulating landscape compositions.
Mm-hmm. And that's the exact facility that we see in the Hartwell Memorial Window, is this incredible ability to convey a landscape composition. Now, unusually for Tiffany Studios, this particular window depicts a known landscape, and specifically, in fact, a very famous landscape. What we're looking at is a view of Mount Shakorowa in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Now, this is not by far the tallest peak in the White Mountains, but it is, in fact, incredibly famous because it can be seen from miles around in all different directions. And the fact that the Hartwells had a home in New Hampshire clearly helped guide the commission towards this known landscape. But it's also fascinating because this was so famous that it was also highly represented in painting. And Tiffany Studios was clearly aware of this tradition of portraying Mount Shakorowa in paintings going back as far as Thomas Cole, who in 1827 painted it in this wonderful romantic view of the peak off in the distance. It's probably hard to see in the zoom, but there's a small figure sort of lying languidly in the foreground with the peak in the background to give a sense of how sublime this view was. And this is something, this entire tradition of painters looking at this particular and iconic peak is one that Tiffany Studios is clearly tapping into. But their genius in many ways was that they thought so keenly and so carefully about how to translate these images that people might have been familiar with, if at all, in a small scale canvas, into a monumental work in glass. And what we see here is that Agnes Northrop essentially devised a fairly symmetrical composition with the peak off in the far distance, and then the entire center of the composition is anchored by this tremendous waterfall that comes down into a pool. And so in short, Tiffany Studios, what's so extraordinary is how they conceived of painting in glass and using glass as a means of representation, of representing this entire naturalistic world with beauty and depth.
focusing on a landscape and bringing nature to life in this way was something that set Tiffany Studios apart at this time. I mean, there was a long history, of course, in ecclesiastic stained glass of having reference to biblical stories, seeing figures in these scenes. And at left, I show a stunning example from Chicago's own Second Presbyterian Church. We've been so lucky to tour their space. They have a design by Agnes Northrop, an amazing Tiffany stained glass program. And this example I show you here really pulls out this contrast between these two approaches, certainly for church windows. One where you see the figure of Christ, you're drawn in, you know what you're looking at. And with the Hartwell Memorial Window, it was more about feeling that spirituality through the land. In some cases, this was very shocking to many congregants. There was some pushback against this shift in approach. With the Hartwell Memorial Window, we see this embraced in their church congregation, and through particularly this commission, a strong tie between the spiritual sense and the sense of place that's depicted.
Right, and I think what's so fascinating is it makes this window quite rare and unique, that it is this extraordinary and monumental window. But in case there be any consideration or any concern about the fact that there was a natural setting in a sacred space, Tiffany made sure to make a connection between the spiritual and the earthly realms through the use of an inscription panel that runs along the bottom of the entire window. And so essentially they use Psalm 121, verse 2, which reads, quote, "My help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth," to ensure that people understood that this was entirely appropriate in a church setting, and that you didn't need necessarily an overt biblical narrative to have a commemorative or memorial window in this case.
So one of the things we ask that I think a lot of people are going to ask when they see this window is, how did they achieve this in glass? This is glass that was enhanced through chemical processes, through innovative combinations of materials. Tiffany Studios was striving to create pieces of glass that would have these natural effects. In some cases, they were sourcing them from other glass firms. And then they're taking these pieces and layering them up to 5 pieces thick to achieve an incredible variety of effects. This is my favorite part of the presentation as we get into these details. And I do have to say, like, one of the benefits of Zoom, there's not a ton in my mind, and I miss people, but here you really get to see these details close up on your screen. And, what they achieved is phenomenal. On the left is an example where you can see a piece of foliage glass, a rolled sheet of glass that's embedded with confetti-like shards of other glass, creating the foliage in trees. On the right is an example of spotted glass, which was another rolled sheet of glass that ended up having these multicolored patterns of circles as a result of chemical and heat treatments that has the effect of dappled light as it hits the ground after being filtered through the trees. On the left is an example of streaky glass, where you have different colors that are rolled together to create these kind of swirling effects here in the waterfall as it trickles down from the mountains. And at right, an example of acid etched glass. So this is a sheet of glass that's treated with hydrofluoric acid in order to achieve different textures and dimensional effects. And if you were to run your hand over this piece of glass, you really feel these pine needles. It's a really tactile quality that is very different from the other panels. These are just pure joy of getting into details here. A combination of spotted glass and streaky against the flora and fauna that's along the bottom of the waterfall. Here, more of that truly amazing confetti glass that really changes. You know, the other one had this vibrant color where you're seeing in this could arguably called like more autumnal, but when you stand back and see the composition, you start to see the different ways they're using different color combinations. This is also a good panel to kind of train your eye to see those layers. If you look at the very center of it, you see that little V of the confetti glass. That's you seeing through the first layer into a more open space beyond. So the way that depth is created through this really is through this kind of pancaking of different layers. And what happens in the middle and what happens in the back has nothing to do with the front. It's really astounding. And here, another one of these treated panels where you get far more of a designed element that's representing ferns. So more of a controlled effort to depict these natural effects, not just in an overall sheet of glass, but again, worked into the composition in such a creative and phenomenal way. And this is another spot where you can see those ferns on the left articulated in green, but when you're looking through them, it's almost this kind of psychedelic swirl behind. So it's really fun. It's a really rewarding experience to stand in front of this work and look at the finest details.
So now that you have a better sense of the material qualities of the window, and we've talked a bit about the subject matter, we also wanted to think about the window as an actual object and how the composition works. And then we're also going to talk about our entire process of bringing the window to the Art Institute. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's 48 individual panels. And so what we're showing you on the right is actually a diagram that represents all 48 of those panels in the 5 lancets that you see in the window. But what's extraordinary about it is that in many cases, it is impossible to tell when you're standing in front of the window where the different panels adjoin. You cannot see the difference from one panel to the next because of the methodology that Tiffany Studios used to construct the window. And in fact, what's fascinating is that the construction methodology is in fact going back to medieval precedent. This was a window that was made so that 1 to 2 people could carry each panel up. I mean, if you think about it, they were working long before they had forklifts and lifts that would help people go in the air. So 2 people would have to carry each panel up to the site of the window and install it, which put a limit on how large any one panel could be. And so in many ways, it's fascinating to think about how the construction is so traditional, even as the glass itself is entirely innovative. Now, the first thing that we had to do after we've acquired it, which we did finally acquire it in 2018, the first thing we had to do was get it out of the church, which was a process that we wanted to do ourselves so that we could control that aspect of it. And so we developed a plan to extract it from the church, which involved building a monumental scaffolding. And I have to say, it was coincidentally that period in Providence, 100 degrees every single day. It was unbearable heat in the church, but it was still just such rewarding work. And this is a photograph on the right, is a photograph of Liz mid-scaffolding, sort of mid-landscape. And it's just absolutely glorious. So it was sort of this moment of getting close to the window for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. It really was the first time that I truly understood the scale, because when you're seeing it from below, I mean, you're taking in the landscape in its entirety, but that first walk up the steps of the scaffolding was when I started to really understand what we were dealing with here. We worked with phenomenal teams along every step of the way here, but the team that we worked with for the de-install was a particularly just pro group, as Sarah said, and you can kind of see it in the image on the right. That's all of them at the tippy top of the window wearing hazmat suits. We're dealing with lead here in, as Sarah said, over 100-degree weather, really just showing their skill in the careful extraction of these panels. And it was both terrifying and exhilarating to see, and I wanted to be able to bring some of that to all of you. So Sarah's going to play a video here where you actually see one of these panels physically coming out of the building.
Actually, Dan, can you play the video for me? Oops. And the tapping you're hearing is them tapping on other parts of the window, but this window gets a little stuck in there, as you'll see. And so it took a bit of a wrench to get it out.
Really, it makes you realize that the delicacy of glass is true, but these were also objects that were made to live for eternity, and in it just like so tremendously put together. So you have the skill of the people that know how they're handling it, and also just the extraordinary skill that was brought to each of these panels. Mm-hmm. Next slide, Sarah or Dan. Whoever.
There we go. All right.
It was long. Thank you. So, as we're taking this in on site, as we're making the plans for coming to the Art Institute, this was a multi-year installation plan. And I say that because we needed to locate it in the best possible place in the museum, which was undoubtedly Gallery 200 here. And it really was a 3-year process. So you can see why from the outset of Sarah and I standing at left in that gallery space. This is, I don't know, I should know the measurement right off the top of my head, but maybe the maximum 12 feet of distance from the railing to the wall. And we needed to create an installation that housed all of the structural elements, the lighting elements, the mounting for the glass, and a frame in a space that could still allow people to move through, to see the window, and to take it in. But it's also a tremendous space for being able to see it from multiple perspectives.
So the first thing that we really embarked upon was to think about the structural design of how we would achieve this, how we would package this entire window in approximately 18 to 24 inches. And I should say, this was something that has really never been done before. And I think we're all very proud of what we've accomplished. And so we developed a structural design that essentially worked in layers. And if you look at the upper right portion of the drawing, we started with what is a mammoth steel structure. And that is what is bolted to the Art Institute's walls. And all of it needed to be able to support the entire weight of the window, the lighting track, the framing elements, and really serve as the replacement for the church masonry itself. And so then moving outwards, we moved from the steel structure to a lighting system, and we'll show you a photo of that in a minute. And then from there to the glass layer itself. And then finally, what is in front, which you'll see when you visit the museum, is a frame that needed to be made out of a lightweight material. And the goal here was to really think long-term about what would be needed in the future, not just now, but in decades to come, to preserve and conserve and protect the window. And so we thought about this as being a design that would be inherently modular, in that the lighting system, for example, can roll out to the side. So we can access the entire lighting system without moving the glass. And then the glass itself can be accessed from the front, and we don't have to deinstall the entire window to do that. So that was really our goal, was to think about what we might need in the future to take care of any issues that might come up, that, whether sort of regular conservation or something problematic in the future that we hope to never encounter, but we didn't want to ignore the possibility of.
And that plan required us both stretching the capabilities and the boundaries of our amazing teams internally, but also working with really tremendous external partners. So this is the fabrication studio that we worked with to execute that mammoth and strong steel frame, and also the lightweight and aesthetically pleasing frame that would go on the front. Ravenswood Studio, which are our local partners. And what they did was astounding. So you get a sense of scale here in their workshop at right of the entire steel structure laid out. And at left, I'm looking at the screen and I can barely see myself, but me and my colleagues, conservator Rachel Sabino and mount maker Andy Talley, really looking at some of these details at Ravenswood Studio before it was shipped to the Art Institute.
Sorry, here we go.
And that is no simple feat. So, Sarah really talked about the need for modularity, not just for the safety of the window and the ways that we could access it, but literally for things like getting this stuff through the building. I mean, there is a way that I always think it really interesting to understand like how things happen at the museum. This is one way that it happens. This has to come in a certain elevator and take a very specific path through the museum. And that might mean passing through some galleries that are surprising. So it's kind of fun to see the care with which we had to get this to its ultimate home.
Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, there we go. This is a photograph of the lighting design system, or the designed lighting system, which again is comprised of LED panels that can come out to the side with a diffusing layer in front. And so that was then installed next into this entire mammoth steel framework.
The conservation efforts that went into glass preparation were really astounding. The window was it was in remarkable condition. You had a church that cared for it. It was 25 feet off the ground, but that said, it's still a window that was over 100 years old. And at left, you get a sense of rarely when we did have to go between layers, how that works. So if you look in the lower left corner of the image on the left, you can see that lead line that's like cinching it all together was cut open and pulled open. Lead is a relatively soft metal, and an entire piece of that confetti glass is removed, which you can see in the image on the right. And that finger there of our conservator, Rachel, is really showing just like 1/4 inch of the depth of this glass, but understanding the jigsaw that is this window.
Mm-hmm. And we have a tiny video. There's no sound on this one, but it gives you a sense of some of the work that had to happen. We worked with an external conservator as well, who's an expert in stained glass. And she would come in and help us clean, which she did with Q-tips. Imagine how many Q-tips were involved in cleaning this entire window. And as well helped us solve the problems. And there you can see she's lifting out one of the pieces that needed repair. So it was extraordinary to also have the ability to collaborate with experts across the country as well in working on this window to make sure that we sort of devise the best system.
I was talking with our conservator, Rachel, who was telling me that front and back, this window is over 700 square feet. That is like a 2-room apartment. And that's how much was quite literally cleaned painstakingly with Q-tips. This is an image that shows how we mounted the glass. So in the church, the glass was puttied into its stone structure. That, of course, was not something that we were going to repeat at the Art Institute, and speaking to all the reasons we needed to be able to access this. But the system that our colleagues devised, it was really masterful. On the left, you can see our mount maker, Andy Talley, fabricating an aluminum panel. And at right, you can see how that glass lives in those aluminum panels with these intricate sets of brackets that hold it in place and ultimately allowed us to be able to mount it in the way that we needed to, and will give us that access in the future. Mm-hmm. And this is also a great way to see the back of the glass.
Right. And these are just some of the many examples of some of the thought that went into this window. That included testing numerous lighting systems. We tested frame materials. We tested frame colors. We wanted to make sure that when we arrived at this week, we started essentially in mid-April on the installation of this, that we really had thought through many of the possibilities before we even started installing the window. But after all of this work, we are now installing. And this is the view of what you see now.
Yeah, this is the museum, and the magic is happening behind. Another in front. We actually loved this view where we realized you can see a little bit through that screen, just enough to know that our team can work with the kind of safe environment that they need. But certainly, I don't know, this window cannot be contained.
Okay. And then, as well, of course, we were working inside the window inside the enclosure this entire time. And here is a photograph of our team at work. And this is, they were often high in the air on lifts, installing the panels using an ingenious handling system that included a sort of invented frame that we used for handling each of the panels, which could weigh up to 100, 120 pounds, which working in midair on a lift is often a little frightening to watch, I have to admit.
It's been just the most beautiful game of Tetris to watch, though, of them going in and dropping these panels in. And then for us, like taking a look at this alignment and realizing that all of this planning really has come to fruition, because seeing the composition come together again here has been spectacular.
Right.
And this is where we pull back the curtain for you all for just a moment to show you what this is.
Yeah, so this is a photograph that we took yesterday. So we had an opportunity this week to lift the curtain. All of the glass has been installed, and we're so excited that we can share it with you, our members, at this moment. The curtain is back down now, and it will not be opened up again until we're done with our work. But this was such an exciting moment to finally see the glass glowing from across the gallery, and know that all of this work and 3 years of planning and invention by our extraordinary colleagues had really come to fruition. We're so excited at the prospect of people coming to see this and hopefully loving it as much as we do, and enjoying looking at the glass and taking in the views as often as you can. So we invite you all to the museum to see this in just a matter of weeks.
It's really, I think it's such a testament to the work that's been done, that it's really honoring that collaborative spirit that was so present and vibrant at Tiffany Studios. And that's what this has been for us. And it's going to live on and truly transform this space. So I can't echo Sarah's sentiments enough that we are ready for all of you to come and really experience this in person. But thank you all for coming to experience it virtually today.
Yeah, we are thrilled. If you have any questions for us, we're happy to answer them. And I'll add my thanks to Liz. Thank you for spending some time with us to learn a bit more about this extraordinary acquisition.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Liz. We absolutely would love to take some questions from the audience. We've gotten a couple of questions about how the window was acquired and what hangs in its place in the church in Providence. Can you tell us a little about that?
So I'll start with how it was acquired. It really was a dialogue with the church. They were very interested in having the window go to a home where it could be presented in its entirety. I mean, it's the sad fate of many Tiffany windows is that they're often dismantled and essentially sold for parts. And to their credit, the church did not want that to happen. And so they really wanted a partner who would commit to the window and installing it as one. And so we spent many hours talking with them about our vision for the window, about our incredible programming that we can do around it long term, for decades to come. We have other Tiffany works in the collection that we can connect to it. We have obviously the Chagall windows, which are an extraordinary work in stained glass. And so it was really just rewarding, I think, to have this collaboration with the church to reach an outcome that I think they're hopefully very happy with, and we are happy with. I mean, I will say when we were in the church de-installing the window, many congregation members came by and talked with us and expressed their enthusiasm. So I think they are quite happy with it. And they were going to think about what they wanted to do with this space.
Yeah, they are taking their time in rethinking it. The window itself was enclosed from the back, so it's not as if when this came out, the church interior was exposed to the elements. But I think they were really thinking through what that space and what this could mean for them in a slow and thoughtful way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and perhaps a little bit related to how it's being viewed and the light. I know you said it was encased in the church. Liz, a couple of questions about the LED lighting, and does it sort of change to reflect sunlight, or at any point do you anticipate the availability to see the reverse?
That's I called installation the farewell tour to the back of the glass. There won't likely be that opportunity in any kind of true sense, because it will live where it's going to live, unless it needs to come out. But the LED system comes out on the side. So I should say we're able to access that without deinstalling all of the glass. And, technology is what it is. It's amazing to see what's being developed. For us, it was such a learning curve to think through all the different products and the possibilities with lighting that we explored. You really can kind of tune the color and see this transform through the day. In the end, nothing competes with the sun. And so we really just needed the maximum output, which is where the window's at. But truly the composition and the different layers of the glass create their own contrast and differentiation throughout the composition. So it's as bright as it can be.
Yeah. I will add, though, something else that was interesting to learn along the way is that by and large, most museums light their windows with fluorescent lights. But to do so, you have potentially significant heat buildup and you need a distance behind it. So that actually immediately suggested we need LEDs because they're cooler and they don't give off heat in the same way. So that, again, this goes to how the space we had selected definitely affected many of our decisions and in certain ways.
Yeah, for those of you that are familiar with the Chagall windows, there's nearly 5 feet of space behind the glass. And for us, our entire package for this window was 18 inches.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. Actually, someone did ask about the Chagall window and if there were similarities, so that's really good to know. And speaking of the location for the window, we do have a question about some of the architectural works that were in that space and if those are being relocated, or if you could talk about that at all.
I'm happy to talk about that. So the Department of Architecture and Design is actually planning a reinstallation of the north wall, which will happen in the next year or so. And that will present an entirely new rethinking of the architectural fragments that have always been in that space. But they will be largely on the north wall and not on the south wall. The window, once you are in the space, it is a very dominant entity because of its scale. And so it sort of deserves its own space in many ways.
Thank you. We do have a question about the different layers of glass and, wondering if at its thickest points, how many layers that's actually comprised of.
We know the Hartwell Memorial Window is at least 5 panes thick in some areas. It may even be 6. There are many areas of the window that we never took apart. The glass was in such condition that we didn't need to, and some of those were in the heaviest areas. Tiffany glass can, I think, has been known to go up to 6 thick. It's well over 1.5 inches in its depth. And really, I can't emphasize enough that the back of this window really looks like a topographical map. It's astounding, just like the small undulations from section to section, and then where you really do see some of these areas where that depth, that kind of color spectrum that was needed is going back in a deep and really exciting and kind of mind-blowing way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what was so extraordinary to think about, is that when we will look at the front and we see a certain element or color pattern, and then you realize, I think Liz mentioned this in the lecture, the back might have nothing to do with that. And yet they knew that they could combine 5 different layers to achieve that very precise effect. And maybe 4 inches away, they've combined similar, layers in a slightly different way and have achieved an entirely different effect. It's an incredible mastery of the glass and its potential of layering that I think is what really differentiates Tiffany, not just the glass itself as innovative in how they've made it, but in this layering that they created so many different effects. I mean, thousands of effects throughout the entire.
It really is. I mean, Sarah, you said it, some 4 inches away. Sometimes these decisions are at the inch scale, where all of a sudden you see a different color that has its own set of lead lines around it. And that could have been 17 feet up in the air. I mean, there was no limit to where they were bringing that level of execution to the entire composition.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, and we have a question about sort of what the interpretation materials for this work might be, if there would be included photographs of its, original setting or images of the back or any of those types of things. Could you talk a little about that?
So the short answer is yes. One of the things that we did was definitely to film the window in the church before we deinstalled it. We wanted a very good documentary record. And so that is certainly featured in many different aspects of interpretation that we're doing. And, and these range from the text panels that will be on the wall. Liz has worked extensively on a digital interactive that I'm sure she can tell you about. We have a video. So there's actually a range of interpretation that we're launching very soon.
Yeah, I mean, we're really thinking about this, this is a permanent collection object. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary to work on something for this long that is so focused and will be on permanent display. So there's ways that we are going to try to tell this story through the text panels that you'll see there. And we've even incorporated some images of details of the glass in order to encourage you to start looking for these types of glass throughout the composition. But the online interactive feature is where you really will be able to kind of zoom in and do your own looking like we've put together in the PowerPoint today that tells more of this story of the conservation of the life of the glass. There's also, as Sarah said, an audio tour, and we're already thinking about the ways to both dive into this in a more scholarly way and continue to grow our audience around this work.
Mm-hmm. And certainly I would just add, we're also collaborating closely with our colleagues in learning and public engagement and in other parts of the museum to think through future programming that, can be for school kids to adult learners, every different aspect we hope will, every different aspect of the museum and its interpretation will be touched by the window, we hope.
I really think this is an object that has that universality. I mean, there's so many ways to be astounded, kind of drawn in by the beauty, to think about the technical aspects of it. And it's also a recognizable work. You can kind of live with it as a landscape, think about the spiritual connections. Like, to me, these possibilities are endless. And it's really exciting to think of how people will think about this outside of us and the kinds of questions that are going to drive its long life and interpretation at the museum.
Will be a highlight for sure. Thank you so much, Sarah and Liz. I think that's all we have time for today. But thank you, and thank you to our members for joining us for this evening's program. We look forward to welcoming you to the museum's galleries and to see this upcoming jewel in the collection. For more information on upcoming virtual events, please visit us online at artic.edu and look for our monthly e-news in your inboxes. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.